In a fight for a renaissance in this country, we want a renaissance of healing and health, vitality, love of life, determination, wonder, all those things that you're supposed to believe are quaint and something from another time. Well, maybe we're a throwback, but we're back to the future here on A Neighbor's Choice. And joining me now is our friend looking at nutrition research and being a pioneer in the field of understanding how these dangerous vegetable seed oil products are harming us in various different ways, in addition to other nutritional science that you don't hear on TV. Tucker Goodrich returns. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well, David. It's nice to talk to you at the moment. Thank you for the kind introduction. At the moment, I was beginning to feel a bit like the coroner. I've spent the day going through the 2020 dietary guidelines. Feel sorry for me.
Now, what made you go through the 2020 dietary guidelines? Are you excited to join their recommendations this holiday season and start eating what they tell you to eat?
That's it, David. I'm going to turn over a new leaf, and I'm going to start chugging down motor oil.
So what led you to beguile yourself with this information?
By the way, I say that as a joke, but castor oil, castrol, was in fact considered to be edible once upon a time and was one of the original motor oils.
Oh, wow.
Don't drink castrol or castor oil. It's very good at making people sick.
Wow.
No, I was just, honestly, I don't remember what got me into this. I was kind of curious about, some dietitian had said to me, or nutritionist or something had said to me the other day that nobody actually follows the dietary guidelines. And I wanted to refresh my memory and look at what the dietary guidelines actually tell us to do and find out if we are, in fact, following the dietary guidelines. And indeed we are, and we're not doing it perhaps perfectly, but it's a really odd claim for these nutritionists to make that our diet will only work for you if you do it perfectly. And anything short of perfection, and you're going to get fat and obese and sick. Isn't that a strange thing for them to say?
Yeah,
so specific.
What are they telling us to eat in the dietary guidelines?
Well, specifically, what I was looking at today is saturated fat, right? When the dietary guidelines came out, the second priority there was people are overweight. You want to be at a healthy weight. Amen. How are you supposed to do that? Well, that's the next section. Avoid too much fat, saturated fat, and cholesterol. So are we as Americans eating less saturated fat than we were back in 1980? Yes. Not much, but a little bit. But yes, we are eating a little bit less. What's really odd is that in 1980, we were eating quite a bit less saturated fat than we had been 10 years earlier, and we were already starting to get fat, right? So despite the fact that they're saying the thing that's causing obesity is saturated fat, as our saturated fat goes down and then stays level, we've nevertheless gotten hugely overweight. What's up with that? I don't really understand that. And yet they tell us the 2020 dietary guidelines. They tell us if you don't want to be overweight, eat a healthy eating pattern. And by that, I presume they mean the dietary guidelines because that's what they're trying to sell us on. And yet they they list the statistics on how healthy everyone is nowadays, and it's absolutely sad. 74% of adults are overweight or have obesity. This is from the 2020 Dietary Guidelines, by the way. Adults age 40 to 59 have the highest rate of obesity, 43% of any age group, with adults 60 years and older having a 41% obesity. And about 40% of children and adolescents are overweight or have obesity. The rate of obesity increases throughout childhood and teen years. So now note that we're getting fatter the younger we are. And our kids are as fat as our parents are nowadays. You know, I'm 54 years old, so I'm right in the middle of that. Our kids are as fat as our parents are right now. And, you know, in the 1980s, I went back and I looked at my yearbook photo. I graduated high school in 1986, so that was after 6 years of dietary guidelines. Nobody was overweight. Even the kid we thought was overweight doesn't look overweight now. So,
yeah, that's,
you know, sorry, go ahead.
I saw a video of a montage of people in the 80s, and maybe it was cherry picked, but they pointed out there was nobody overweight in the 80s videos, and it's like, you know, that's one of the reasons why, you know, the fat kid was picked on in the 80s, because they were rare, so they were easy to scapegoat. But when everybody's overweight in today's time, I guess that's not going to stand out as much, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, because now, you know, as according to the guys who tell us what to eat, everybody's now overweight. 74% of adults are overweight or have obesity. So how have those dietary guidelines turned out? So then they turn around and they say, well, you haven't been following it, and that's why they haven't worked. But I mean, Nina Teicholz has gone through, who's a big criticism, justly, of the dietary guidelines, has gone through and looked at exactly how the diet has changed in this country. And we're absolutely following the dietary guidelines. Yes, maybe not perfectly, but again, it's an odd sort of diet that you have to follow perfectly for it to have any benefit. Yes, we're eating more fruits and vegetables. We're eating less red meat. We're eating less saturated fat. We're eating more polyunsaturated fat and lots more seed oils.
And so it's not working out, is it? So how come, you know, in the 80s, let's go back there, though, in the 80s, and, you know, we had vegetable oils. People were being told to eat them, right? How come we didn't see obesity? Was it because there was a lag or something? People still were eating butter, or what? What was going on differently?
Well, I think part of it is that I think we know that some other animal fats are clearly protective, right? I mean, they've done studies where they show that omega-3 fats are protective against the obesogenic effects of omega-6 fats. And I suspect that's probably true with other fats like dairy fats, which we've also, I mean, you read the dietary guidelines, they're all about low-fat dairy, right? We have lots of I'm not a big fan of epidemiology, but all the epidemiology says that kids who eat high-fat dairy have lower rates of obesity than kids who eat low-fat dairy. So what does our government to tell us to do? Of course. They tell us to do the thing that's going to make us fat, and then they blame us for not doing it well enough, right? So back when I was growing up, you know, I mean, they had low-fat dairy around, but I don't remember it being as big a thing as it is now. We certainly didn't have things like soybean, quote-unquote, milk or whatever those other bizarre milks that one sees in the supermarket now are. The only place you could get something like that was in a health food store.
Yeah, they say these weird things like hand-milked cashews. I'm like, how in the blue world does that happen? You know, how do you milk a cashew?
Yeah, I didn't even know cashews had nipples.
Yeah, I mean, good. I guess they identify as udders when needed, right?
That must be it. Yeah, so it's sad, and I don't see any evidence from going through these. I mean, the only thing that they changed, and this tells you how little they've changed, is they dropped cholesterol as a quote-unquote nutrient of concern, dietary cholesterol that you might get from eggs. And because they have no evidence, they can't find any evidence whatsoever that it has anything to do with any sort of disease, let alone cardiovascular disease. But they still recommend that you eat as little as possible.
That's so dumb.
It's crazy. So, I mean, I can't see that they've changed a single thing since these first. Nothing. They've changed a lot. They've changed the pictures. They have a My Plate now instead of a food pyramid and all this other nonsense. But this is, moving the deck chairs around on the Titanic. The basic message hasn't changed, and if anything, it's gotten more pro-vegan. I mean, one of the Dietary Guidelines Scientific Advisory Committee members is a committed vegetarian medical missionary, a part of the Adventist Church. And his life's work is to advocate for the Adventists' vegetarian and vegan diet ideas. Why on earth that fellow is on the Dietary Guidelines, I have no idea.
I want to turn to this new story out about red meat studies, but to set the table, I've got a listener question. A listener question about uric acids. They said the doctor told my aunt not to eat red meat because of buildup in uric acid in their legs. They keep swelling up, and instead give loads of medicines. So they're wondering if there is a dietary link between excess uric acid in the legs and eating red meat, and therefore should people give up eating red meat if that's what they're dealing with?
Yeah, in other diet news from the 1950s, no is the short answer to that. There's a better link between fructose and sugar intake than there is between red meat.
So you're saying that the eating fructose, like fruit forms of sugar, is what's going to cause uric acid to build up in the legs? Or you're saying there's something even more? Just
table sugar is half fructose, right? Honey is half fructose, more or less. The link between red meat and uric acid and gout has been debunked for years. And, but it's another one of these medical myths that probably won't die in either one of our lifetimes.
BigThink.com. So just to clarify, if you reduce red meat, it won't reduce your uric acid buildup, or it may, but it may not fix it.
It's not going to make a difference.
Wow. Yeah, a lot of people talk about that. Red meat is not a health risk. New study slams years of shoddy research. This is from BigThink.com. Years of shoddy research have overstated the risk. Could you give us a little bit of your perspective on this? What does this new study say?
Well, basically what they're doing is going back and saying what all of us who've been paying attention to this have known, which is that it's just what they're calling science is mostly propaganda. They're taking, at best, tiny little relationships and blowing them up into a big deal when, in fact, it's still a tiny little relationship. They ignore. I did an article on my blog about this a little while ago. This was a fellow who was on the World Health Organization panel that came to the conclusion that red meat causes cancer. And he said it was an entirely biased group. Most of them were vegetarians. They ignored all of the animal evidence that red meat had nothing to do with cancer. In other words, if you go feed animals red meat, they never get cancer, right? And then they looked at all these tiny little associations and, said, well, we're gonna blow this up into something. And it's a scam. Propaganda is probably too kind a word for it. David Klurfeld, who is a top He was, ironically, he is National Program Leader for Human Nutrition in the Agricultural Research Service of the USDA. So even the USDA scientist comes around and says, no, meat's not a problem. He was the editor-in-chief of the Journal of the American College of Nutrition, and he is now an associate editor of the American Journal for Clinical Nutrition. So a top American nutrition science. But this is one of the guys who actually acts like a scientist, and he recognizes that nutritional epidemiology isn't very useful, and that if you have a conflict between nutritional epidemiology and experimental evidence, then you have a problem. I mean, there's, two cases in point. We have red meat and we have vegetable oils. The World Health Organization says they both cause cancer. They give them the same rating. In one case, with red meat, the animal studies say the reverse. The animal studies say that it's not carcinogenic. With seed oils, the animal studies say that it is carcinogenic and that it's, a confirmed animal carcinogen. So which one are you going to worry about? You should worry about the one that's consistent through science and not contradicted by the experimental studies.
Yeah. So what is your takeaway point from this Big Think report on this new red meat study? Is it a good study? And what is the conclusion that the listeners might need to know if you were able to see it?
Yeah, it's a good study. It's this, I've got a bunch of blog posts on my blog talking about this going back 10 years. It's unusual that somebody is coming out with a big, epidemiological study where they say, quote, we found weak evidence of association between unprocessed red meat consumption and cancer, breast cancer, type 2 diabetes, and ischemic heart disease. We found no evidence of an association between unprocessed red meat and stroke and either kind of stroke. So, yeah, that kind of makes sense because, humans became human on a diet of red meat, right? What allowed us to grow big brains and expand all over the world was hunting animals and eating them and growing big brains and becoming intelligent and building boats and making weapons and, singing songs and drawing paintings and all the rest of the things that eating a diet of red meat has allowed us to do. That doesn't mean we're carnivores, by the way, but it does mean that anybody who claims that red meat is harmful has got a really big mountain of evidence to disprove in order to make that claim.
And to that end, I want to go to another article that touches on issues that we're all interested in. Scientists don't agree on what causes obesity, but they know what doesn't. This is a story in the New York Times, and in the story, Richard Hanania is a scientist, or what is he? I've had him on my show. I think he's got a PhD.
I think he runs a think tank.
Yeah, he's been on my program on Things Hidden, but he showed how, he said the world's top obesity researchers came together and couldn't agree on anything except the idea that fat people are not responsible for their own problems. And he says political correctness has killed science, and you shot back, actually, this was a good first step. And this is an example of where when you get right-wing groupthink, you can lose sight of what's actually going on, right? That the actual researchers, they basically said it's not a personal failing that causes obesity. And I think the right wing has gotten stuck on saying, oh, no, that's all it is. Again, that's kind of like 1950s thinking at some point.
Well, I mean, after what's happened with science, quote unquote science, the last couple of years, I can certainly understand where this guy is coming from. But in fact, as I said, and as I think I retweeted later to clarify, the politically correct view was the idea that the reason we all got fat was because we didn't have enough willpower, and that we're a bunch of weak-willed simpletons who need the government to tell us what to eat via the dietary guidelines, right? George McGovern, one of the most famous progressive politicians of the latter half of the 20th century, was the guy who came up with the idea of the dietary guidelines. So that was the politically correct view. What these scientists have realized is that that's not right. That's not what's happening. And while they couldn't agree with a consensus view of what's happening, just the fact that their consensus was there's more to it than just people are weak-willed, it was a huge advance, I think.
So that was a good step forward to recognize that it's actually not just, your slothfulness or whatever, or your not slothfulness, but gluttony that drives obesity. It's actually in your opinion, the seed oils that have been put into our foods and subsidized to our detriment, right?
Yeah, and that chemically make you want to overeat. You want an explanation for people overeating. How about a food that makes you overeat? That's pretty straightforward. And, but this is a good example of what happens when science starts losing its credibility because it politicizes itself, is that even, it's the boy who cried wolf. Even when they find a wolf, nobody believes them.
Well, let me clarify. When you said that seed oils cause you to want to overeat, and you've explained the chemical process for that before, hormones, right? But suppose you override that urge to overeat. Would seed oils never cause you to be obese then?
It would help. There are a couple of different pathways by which seed oils make you overeat or obese, and blocking the chemical urge to overeat would definitely makes things better, but it doesn't get you 100% of the way there. You still need to avoid seed oils because I'm saying if someone didn't even block it with a chemical or whatever, but they just through sheer willpower ate lots of vegetable oils as their government tells them and just resisted the urge to overeat, would they get overweight still, even eating the vegetable oils? The problem with that, David, is that nobody can resist the urge to overeat. Right? I mean, nobody. Very, very, very few people can be consistently hungry and live with it. And that's the one clear thing that science has shown us over the last few decades of obesity research. And this is why a calorie restriction fails, because people just, 99.9% of people can't stand being hungry all the time.
And that's because they're still eating omega-6s, too, that's driving up that hunger when they're restricting calories, right?
Right. Just like most people, wouldn't starve themselves to death by not eating. It's the same signal, right? Seed oils make you think that you're starving, so you eat.
Well, very good. Tucker, I really appreciate your... Go ahead.
Go ahead.
We're out of time, but I wanted to give you a plug. Check out your YouTube channel, Tucker Goodrich. Check out your website, yelling-stop.blogspot.com. Any Thanksgiving tip here? We got just 30 seconds of seed oil-free Thanksgiving advice.
Yeah, you can do a seed oil-free Thanksgiving, and it'll taste a heck of a lot better, and nobody will want to come back for seconds. It's really quite miraculous how well it works.
Very good. Thanks again, Tucker.
Thank you, David. Have a great holiday.
And same to you, and happy Thanksgiving to everyone out there as we celebrate a very important time. We don't want to have an attitude of envy. That's what drives so much of your culture today. It's resentment unleashed. It's envy unleashed. We need to have gratitude unleashed, thankfulness unleashed, right? Being content. Let's let that spread like wildfire and watch as people see their culture blossom again. We don't have to buy into the mental prison that we're in decline. We can turn it around, but the only way to do so is to have a gratitude aspect, a grateful heart, an attitude of gratitude, right? As they used to say, that is the secret to having that disposition needed to not fall prey to every ideologue, every scandal, every grievance campaign, every identity politics gimmick. All that stuff is predicated on an envy-riddled heart. So let's be grateful. Let's be thankful. And from that place, we can do so much fun together. I'm David Gornoski. Godspeed.